It starts like any other day, until it doesn't. An elderly veteran limps into a courthouse, humble and unassuming. They mock him, humiliate him, and laugh while doing it. But they just disrespected the wrong person. Where are you watching from? Comment below. It was just after 8 a.m. when William Harrison stepped out of his worn-out Buick and slowly climbed the stone steps of the Charleston Federal Courthouse. The morning sun highlighted his stooped shoulders and sparse white hair as he paused to catch his breath. At 76, his movements were deliberate, each step a quiet reminder of decades of service. The small veteran's pin on his modest navy blazer caught the light briefly as he adjusted his well-worn leather portfolio. His eyes, still sharp despite his age, scanned the building with the careful assessment of someone who had faced greater challenges than steep courthouse steps. He didn't wear his judicial robe outside the courtroom. Never had. He preferred to enter buildings like any other citizen, quiet, unassuming, observant. But today, he wouldn't be greeted as a judge. He was just another elderly veteran walking into a place where respect had become optional. At the main security checkpoint, the atmosphere shifted. Deputy Hank Riker, a court bailiff known for his rigid attitude, narrowed his eyes as Harrison approached the metal detectors. He sized up the old man, the slight tremble in his hands, the weathered face, the veteran's pin, and something in his expression hardened. "Sir," he said, voice unnecessarily loud, "I'm going to need you to step aside." Harrison paused. "Is there a problem, officer?" Riker didn't answer immediately. His eyes swept over Harrison with unconcealed disdain. No ID displayed. You can't just wander into a federal building looking like that. Harrison calmly reached into his blazer and produced his federal credentials. The badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but Riker barely glanced at it before slipping it into his pocket. "I'd like that returned," Harrison said quietly. Riker stepped closer. "You in a rush to get somewhere, old-timer?" The words hit like a physical blow. For a moment, Harrison wasn't in the courthouse anymore. He was standing at the altar 40 years ago, red wine dripping from his dress uniform, the shocked faces of wedding guests, the cruel laughter of the woman who had once claimed to love him. Riker's hand clamped around Harrison's thin arm, steering him toward a side hallway. "Let's go. You're getting a special check." Inside a windowless screening room, Harrison stood silently as Riker circled him like a predator. "Empty your pockets," Riker ordered. Harrison complied, placing his items one by one on the steel table: keys, handkerchief, and finally, a small velvet pouch. Riker upended the pouch, and out tumbled a purple heart medal and a worn gold wedding band. He picked up the medal, turning it carelessly between his fingers. "Playing soldier were we?" he smirked. "You veterans all think you deserve special treatment." Harrison's mind flashed back again. His bride, Amy, standing beside him as his former girlfriend, Melissa, had screamed accusations, red wine staining his father's cherished uniform. "You're not a hero," she had shouted. "You just want everyone to think you are." Back in the present, Riker was tossing the medal between his hands like a coin. "This real, or something you bought at a pawn shop?" "That was earned in Vietnam," Harrison said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Riker laughed. "Sure it was, Grandpa." He dropped the medal onto the floor, where it bounced with a metallic ping. "Oops." As Harrison bent painfully to retrieve it, Riker muttered, "Pathetic. Probably never even saw combat." Harrison straightened slowly, medal clutched in his weathered hand, dignity intact but spirit wounded. Again, "You're free to go," Riker finally said, opening the door with mock courtesy. "Courtroom's that way. Don't get lost." Harrison reclaimed his belongings, carefully returning the medal and wedding band to their pouch. His badge was tossed onto the table like trash. He picked it up without comment and walked out into the hall, his steps measured, his expression unreadable. But in his chest burned something deeper than humiliation. It was purpose. As he walked, he thought of Amy, how she had stood beside him at their wedding, defiant as she pinned her father's own medal to his wine-stained uniform. "This man," she had declared to everyone, "saved 3 of his fellow soldiers. He doesn't need to prove his honor to anyone." The community had rallied then, each guest offering handkerchiefs to clean his uniform. The memory strengthened his resolve now. Because what Riker didn't know was this. Harrison wasn't there as a defendant. He wasn't there to observe. He wasn't there for anyone else's judgment. He was a judge, and he was about to take his seat on the bench. The low hum of voices filtered from the courtroom double doors. It was a high-profile morning. A police misconduct hearing involving several officers from a brutal incident during a veterans' protest. National attention. Heavy press. Harrison was supposed to enter from the private chambers, his robe waiting inside. Staff prepped, decorum preserved. But today, that plan didn't matter. He stopped just outside the courtroom, took a deep breath, then pushed both doors open wide. The courtroom stilled instantly. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Heads turned, and then the realization began to ripple. His shoes clicked against the marble floor as he walked past rows of lawyers, journalists, plaintiffs, and defendants. Some stared in confusion, others in disbelief. At the front, behind the judge's bench, his chair sat empty, waiting, and then it hit them. The elderly veteran they had watched be escorted to the hall, like a suspect, was their judge. Harrison stepped behind the bench and turned slowly to face the courtroom. His face was calm, almost expressionless, but his eyes held steel. The bailiff, the same man who had mocked his medal, stood by the side door. When Harrison made eye contact with him, Riker went absolutely still. Harrison didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for the robe folded neatly on his chair. He slipped it on himself, one slow movement at a time. It rested on his shoulders like armor. He turned to the court clerk. "Is the docket ready?" he asked, voice even. "We will begin today with preliminary testimony on case 2371F, United States versus Charleston Police Department," Harrison said as if nothing had happened. "Charges of abuse of power, excessive force, and civil rights violations during the Veterans Day parade protest. All parties present." A murmur of "Yes, Your Honor," echoed back. The attorneys shifted uncomfortably. Some were wide-eyed, others looked guilty, and some looked angry. Angry that a frail-looking veteran had dared walk in after what they assumed had destroyed him. He ignored them all. "We will proceed." After the second witness, he called a recess. The courtroom emptied in a daze. Harrison stayed seated. After several minutes, when only his clerk, 2 officers, and Riker remained, he finally looked at him. "Deputy Riker," he said, voice sharp as glass. Riker stopped mid-step. "Why, yes, Your Honor," stepped forward. Riker moved like a man walking toward his execution. "State your full name for the record." "Hank Riker." "How long have you served as bailiff at this courthouse?" 14 years, sir, Your Honor." Harrison tapped a pen against his legal pad. "And in those 14 years, how many veterans have you assaulted in that screening room?" The color drained from Riker's face. "I didn't know." "That's not what I asked." Riker looked around for help. None came. "How many complaints have been filed against you?" "Deputy Riker?" "I'm not sure." Harrison's voice rose not in volume, but in precision. 12. 12 formal complaints, all buried, all dismissed, because you were behind procedure and protocol. Riker's mouth trembled. "I didn't know who you were." "And that's the problem, isn't it?" Harrison said, his voice suddenly weary. "You thought I was no one, just another old veteran you could bully for sport. You didn't even bother to check my name." "Because of you," Harrison continued, "this courthouse, this supposed temple of justice, has been stained. And because you assaulted a federal judge in his own courthouse, you are now the subject of a criminal investigation." He turned to the officers standing by the exit. "Escort Deputy Riker into custody. Formal charges to follow." The officers moved quickly, cuffs already in hand. Wait!" Riker shouted. "You can't do this." But he was wrong. Harrison already had. Later that afternoon, the courtroom was different. The ceiling fans hummed a little too loudly. Staff exchanged sidelong glances. People who had known for years and said nothing. Harrison's clerk entered quietly, holding a fresh stack of notes. "Your Honor," she said cautiously, "a former courthouse employee is asking to speak with you." Minutes later, Maria Talley entered. She had worked in records for years, efficient, quiet, never causing trouble. "Thank you for seeing me, Judge Harrison," she said, sitting stiffly. "What happened to you this morning? It's happened before. Many times." "I'm aware of the complaints," Harrison replied. "It's worse than that." She placed a folder on his desk. These were never officially filed. People who tried were discouraged. Some were threatened with contempt charges if they wasted the court's time. Harrison opened the folder. Page after page of informal complaints. Veterans denied proper access, subjected to enhanced screening, humiliated for their service pins or military IDs. "Why come forward now?" he asked. "Because you reminded me of my father," she said, simply. He was a Marine, came home from Vietnam to people who called him terrible things. He never complained, but it broke something in him. "When I saw what they did to you, a judge, I realized no one was ever going to be safe if I stayed silent." Harrison's face remained impassive, but his hand, when he closed the folder, trembled slightly. The next morning, Harrison entered the courtroom through the proper chambers. His robe was already on. His gait was steady. The court rose as one. "Before we resume yesterday's proceedings," he began, "I have a separate ruling to announce." The gallery hushed. "Yesterday morning, I experienced firsthand what many veterans face in our justice system. I was targeted, humiliated, and assaulted, not because of anything I did, but because of who I appear to be, an elderly veteran who seemed vulnerable." He gestured to a thick document before him. "I am instituting a mandate for all bailiffs, marshals, and courthouse personnel under this jurisdiction. It's called the Harrison Standard." A few heads lifted at the name. "It requires comprehensive respect training, psychological screening, regular evaluations, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior inside federal courthouses, especially toward those who have served this country." He addressed the full courtroom now. 40 years ago, I stood in my military dress uniform on what should have been the proudest day of my life, my wedding day. Someone deliberately humiliated me then, pouring wine over my father's uniform that I had worn in his honor. The courtroom was completely silent. Back then, my community stood up for me. Today, I stand up for every veteran who walks through these doors. Justice isn't just about laws on books. It's about dignity. It's about respect. And from this day forward, that's what this courthouse will provide to everyone, regardless of their age, their appearance, or their past service. Months passed. The Harrison Standard spread first within the courthouse, then across the district. Other judges adopted it. Other cities called about it. A bill was being drafted in Congress. Harrison hadn't planned that. But then again, much of what happened wasn't planned. He just hadn't backed down. That alone was enough to turn the tide. One afternoon, Harrison stepped into a Veterans Affairs Center. He'd been invited to speak about justice, about courage. The room was packed. Veterans young and old, some in wheelchairs, others standing tall, all waiting to hear from the judge who had changed things. Harrison didn't speak long. He didn't need to. The veterans asked the real questions. "How do you stay calm when people disrespect you? Did you ever want to give up?" He answered them all honestly. But the last question stuck with him. From a young soldier missing an arm. "Do you still believe in the system?" Harrison paused. "I don't believe in what the system was," he finally said, "but I believe in what it can become. And I believe in people like you asking that question. That's how it changes." When he left, he sat in his car holding a framed photograph. Him and Amy on their wedding day. His uniform stained, but his face proud as community members surrounded them in support. Amy had passed 5 years ago, but her strength still guided him. The White House called not long after. Harrison had been chosen to receive the Presidential Medal of Justice. The ceremony was televised, speeches prepared, dignitaries in attendance. As he stepped to the podium, applause rose, but he didn't acknowledge it. He simply began, "I wasn't supposed to be here. Not because I wasn't qualified, but because for most of my life, systems weren't built with aging veterans in mind." He paused. "I'm not here because I'm special. I'm here because I refuse to let disrespect stand, not just for myself, but for every veteran who deserves better." As the ceremony ended, somewhere across the state, Hank Riker watched the broadcast from prison. The screen eventually went black, but the silence stayed with him. What happened that day wasn't just about one veteran or one courthouse. It reminded us that justice is about standing tall when the world expects you to shrink. If this story moved you, please share it and comment below. Because respect isn't just given, sometimes it must be demanded.